what does music and psychoanalysis have got to do together? But before we plunge into that, a couple of provisos. One, when I speak about psychoanalysis, it's the Freudian Lacanian text, which is rooted in the clinic and it's not transcendental. So I'm not talking from Melanie Klein's position, for instance, or Adler or even Jung. It's strictly Freud and Lacan. This is a huge difference there. The second proviso is when I use the term music for this particular session, I'm restricting myself to a particular area of Western music, which is known as classical music, but also pop music. It might surprise some of you that classical and pop music use exactly the same structure. There is no difference whatsoever. And we'll explore that particular structure in a moment. It's also called goal-orientated, as from Schenker, in the days of organicism, which is a philosophy created by Goethe back in the 18th century. It's also known as the common practice, and more shortly we call it 1-5-1. It's a bit mysterious if you're not a musician, but basically you start from a definite place. Once you've started from there, there's only one other place you can go to, which is this 5. Once you've reached that 5, there is only one other door you can go to, which is this final 1, also known as the tonic. This is a system which took about 400 years to be elaborated. They were not looking for it, but from experimentations and trying this and trying that, eventually this 1-5-1 system got stabilized and more people started using it. We're talking about Palestrina, for instance. That's when it started spreading. Yeah. Before that, we had what was called the Roman chant, also known as Gregorian chant, which was practiced only in the monasteries. And that itself had no definite organization, but it was derived from the Byzantine chant. So in a way, Western music has a lot of debts towards the East. So it is about this particular music I will be talking about then. And very bizarrely, while preparing this presentation, I ended up with taking a political position. This is not surprising, actually. This is the way the unconscious works, and we'll talk about a bit more about the unconscious. But both Freudian and Lacanian psychoanalysis, in their practice and in their text, have a political dimension, which we'll explore later on. And because I'm looking at it from a semiotic point of view, we have actually precursors of a semiotic approach. Can you scroll down a little bit? Thank you. One such, oh yes, before going into that, Freud and Lacan indeed were not particularly interested in music for some bizarre reason. Freud said about his object of studies, if I can't see it and touch it, I'm not interested. So I refer you back to his text on the Moses of Michelangelo, and then go and have a look at the replica of a statue at the V&A. It's absolutely enormous. So he was interested in the statue of Moses by Michelangelo, but music, nothing. And he also says, I refuse to be moved by something I don't understand. So his daughter Anna Freud tells us he knew a few airs, which were in fashion in his days. He knew a few airs from Don Giovanni, for instance, Mozart Don Giovanni. He had in analysis Mahler, the composer, for a few days. But, yes, and they did actually a wild analysis. Him and Mahler went walking through the woods in Vienna, and that's how the analysis was performed. Mahler complained that he had a worthless tune which kept coming back in his composition, and that's why he went to see Freud. Yeah. It was a kind of obsessive thingy. An obsession is when you don't want to hear something. Okay. And Lacan, as for Lacan, it's about the same. Never hardly talks about music except in Intervention on the Transfer. He says, he uses the metaphor, to give a musical sentence its resolution chord. Although I'm not sure what a resolution chord is. Right? So, and then somewhere else he uses the metaphor as a return to the tonic in music. This is half true, half erroneous. Yes, the return to the tonic in music is specific to Western music only. That its unique differential aspect with any other form of music. All other musics we know of do not use that system of 1-5-1. And the final one is indeed the return to the tonic. And that's what articulates Western music, both classical music and pop music. So there is no difference between a song by the Beatles, for instance, or Coldplay, which I understand is your favorite band. Not anymore, okay. And a symphony by Mozart, right? So precursors of semantic approach, our beloved A.B. Marx, Arnold Bernard Marx, which to us musicologists is like, well, not a god, but certainly an inspiration, because he single-handedly started musicology by looking at the score, the notes in the score. Just before him, people like Rameau and the people of the Encyclopedia were looking at music in terms of sound, partials. So they were looking at it in terms of physics, not in terms of the notes on the score. That's what A.B. Marx does. And he makes some interesting discoveries. He talks about tone relations, tone succession, tone chain. Now the expression tone chain is very, very, very close to the Lacanian expression metonymic chain. Aha. So he looks at it as a movement. And then he's got this concept of Sätzen, Gesätzen, sentences, counter-sentences. And it's basically the equivalent of a metaphor. And he came up with a very funny explanation about how music is composed. There's this pitch, and it's on its own, so it wants a little friend. So a friend arrives, and there's two of them. Great. Oh, but they feel lonely, so, oh, why not another two? So you've got 4. But they still feel lonely, so why not another 4, 8, until you arrive at a complete sentence. That's how he explained the metonymic, metaphoric aspect of music composition. This is why it's a complete break with what was done in the past. And then there is a concept of sonata form, which has nothing to do with a sonata, but that's the term he came up with. It's the way, basically, he found that the music of his days was organized. One part called exposition, another part called development, and a final part called recapitulation. The fact is, no one created that form. This is the way composers of the early 18th century, late 16th century started composing. And you can actually discern that form by doing a particular analysis of a piece in all those pieces of those days. And we can notice that already there is a semiotic aspect there, because exposition and development are different from one another. Development is different from recapitulation. And then if you take them 2 by 2, exposition and development are different from development and recapitulation. So this was the way A.B. Marx found that music of his days and previous to him was organized, without anyone having actually decided that's the way we're going to do music. Okay? And then we have our friend Schoenberg, Arnold Schoenberg, better known for his serialist method of composition. We have a new one. Hello there. Our friend Schoenberg, as I was saying, Schoenberg also saw something in work composed according to the rules of Western harmony and counterpoints. And it's called motivic analysis. And the interesting aspect about it is he also goes to the score. What he found out was that in any piece composed according to the rules of Western counterpoint and harmony. At the very, very beginning, in the very first few bars, sometimes in the very first bar itself, you will find a series of notes which determine the entire composition. That composition, a particular composition, can be reduced to its early manifestations. And this type of analysis is called motivic analysis, and he called those little signifiers a motive form. That's the name he came up with. And obviously the motive form is similar to the developing variation as put forward by A.B. Marx. In fact, can we see the Satzen, Gesatzen? There is a picture of how Marx does that. Can you zoom in a bit? Thank you. So you have this first group, second group, fourth group, third and fourth group, and they combine together to form one group here and then another group there. So it's that, which is repeated again, but shifted up in pitches. And then we've got that, which is the reverse form of that. Yeah. So we very obviously have metaphor and metonymy at work there. It's just that in the days of A.B. Marx, linguistics had not been invented, so the idea of metonymy and metaphor was not present in their mind. And then we have another aspect of Schoenberg where he says that dissonance is a remote consonance and consonance is a remote dissonance. So he creates a relationship between the two, whereas usually we tend to see them as two entirely separate facts. And he also came up with a concept of structural functions of harmony. Harmony has a function, and in Western harmony, in Western music, each pitch of a scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, has a particular function. They are not independent from one another. And he also comes up with the concept of harmonic regions. In other words, they are related. Can we see the harmonic regions, please? If you're not a musician, don't panic. But this is very useful for us composers because we can see how different scales are related. Music, I'm afraid, is quite, well, in fact, very technical. And I apologize in advance if you're not a musician and can't get your head around that. But this is the center, this is where you start from, this is your tonic, and then there are scales, other scales you can go to, and he shows how they are all related, and the same here. In the Western scale, the most important note is your very first note. However, normally your second most important note is not the second one, not the third or fourth, it's the fifth note. But those two are related. Without one, you can't have the other. So let's say that the most important notes, two notes, are the very first note of a scale and then the fifth one. And that's how the whole thing is balanced. Hence the name 1-5-1. First note of a scale, fifth note of a scale. And then back to the first note of a scale. Yeah?
With the ratios 2 over 1 and 2 over 3 over 2.
We are not concerned with ratios anymore. That's what Schoenberg and A.B. Marx do. They get away. They get away from the idea of ratios to stick purely to what's on the score. Yeah. Okay, we can close that one. Thank you. Now, what is the Freudian Lacanian text? Because this is where I'm speaking from. I think most of you know what the Freudian Lacanian text is. Alison? The gentleman at the back? Do you know what the Freudian Freud Lacan are? Yeah. You do? Okay, so I don't need to go too much into it. But can we go to the next? It's the next. Yeah, so you need to close this one. It's a exposition to you know about unconscious, preconscious, conscious. Okay. Yeah, exposition too. So, yes, I have a nice little metaphor to explain the Freudian Lacan text. Someone goes to the doctor and says, "Doctor, I'm not feeling too good." "All right, what's wrong with you?" "Well, I don't know, but I'm not feeling too good." "Well," Freud says, "tell me what it is you do not know." And this is a huge epistemological shift there, because there is knowledge which is not known. And that's a very important factor here. "Okay, doctor, I'll tell you what I don't know, but how do I do that?" "Be an idiot, do not reason, tell everything which comes through your mind as is." And that's another aspect of this knowledge which is not known, because the best way to grasp at it is precisely to be an idiot, not to reason like Descartes did, for instance. Yeah? So that's the very characteristic. Unconscious, preconscious. Conscious memory traces or signifiers inscribed with a quota of libido. And that's a very important thing, this concept of libido, which later on Freud will call the drive. And all that is subject to a constant rearrangement. So we can actually look at the psychical, according to Freud, as a Mobius strip. Can we have a picture of a Mobius strip, please? No? That's, okay. If you ever played with that, this is a non-orientable surface. You cannot, if you are on the surface of it and you're walking along, you cannot say on which side you are. So Freud will insist that the psychical, certainly part of the psychical, are both an inside and an outside. He didn't have the concept of a Mobius strip. And the next picture, you can also conceive of it as a trefoil knot. Okay? And we can say it's a container which conditions the content, and a content which conditions the container. This is also very important. It's not linear. Yeah, the way it works is not linear at all. So we are faced here with what science nowadays calls a complexity. And the whole thing is, of course, in a field of libido. Now, is music a language? As far as I'm concerned, that's a non sequitur. I'm not interested by that question. Maybe you are, but I'm not. Okay? What I'll say is that music does not have a signified, it does not have a denotation. Hence, it is very easy for music, any piece of music, to acquire a connotation or a meaning. It does not have a signified, so you can stick whatever you want to whatever piece of music. Lovers nowadays are very fond of our song. Oh, that song was playing in the bar, in the club where we met. Okay. So that's as good a meaning or connotation as any other. The two questions which orient my research are: how do we go from the movement of the molecules of air, because that's how sound is produced, to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, for instance, or your favorite piece of music? In other words, how does an object of perception become an object of desire? That's what has so far orientated my research, and that's what we'll be looking at. Another thing which is very important as well, the unconscious is outside of time. It is timeless. If you have been in analysis, or you're going to analyze this one day, you will remember things from 20, 30, 40 years ago, and they are as fresh as today. That's one of the phenomena of psychoanalysis. And also, very early on, Freud conceives of the conscious as a sense organ, like any other. but he will not elaborate on that in his papers until much later, until the ego and the id. Right. So, we've got these tools in place. Now, let's use those tools to look at some aspects of music and musicology. So with those Freudian Lacanian tools, what can we say? We have a very common assertion, well, I like this music or I don't like this music. And the first hint as to how to look at this issue is given to us by both Saussure and Freud. Saussure, in his course of Cours Général de Linguistique, general course in linguistics, says it's the psychical impression of a sound. That's how he qualifies the phenomenon of hearing sound. As for Freud, in Jokes in the Relation to the unconscious, talks about expenditure of psychical energy. So in fact, we should say, I like or dislike the effect this music has on my psychical. That's a very important thing here. And for instance, two very good examples, one of which I'm sure you know. The first one is from Rameau, his Castor and Pollux opera in 1737. He puts two entirely different parts together, one in F minor and the other one in E flat, without modulation. Now, we've lost the effect this can have, but in those days, it was an absolute rule of music that to go from one key to another, you had to modulate. And Rameau does no modulation. In the opera house, everybody goes, it's a huge thing. We've lost that kind of thing nowadays, but in those days, it was a big thing. Everybody was talking about it for the next 20 years. Okay? The other one is the premiere of Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. It was a huge scandal. People were fighting in the room. Half of the house was for that kind of new music, as it was known in those days, and half was saying, it's scandalous, it's not music, you are insulting us, etc. People were actually fighting with one another. Okay. Here is the Saussure impression on the psychical of the sound. So this is why, in terms of music, well, it's I like, dislike the effect it has on my psychical. And how do I know that I like something? This is where the Lacanian text is very useful. It's in reference to my object A, which is a big mystery for quite a lot of people. But we'll explore that in the recapitulation part. And at this stage, because I'm introducing object A, I'm also introducing a new category. Just as we have for Lacan the notion of gaze, I've invented the category of the voice, which I write with the Z, in order to differentiate it. The gaze is what orientates what we look at and what we enjoy or do not enjoy looking at. But it has to remain invisible. It's what lightens up, bring lights on the stage, and which makes us see things. But it has to remain invisible. That's one thing. And I'm proposing this new category of a voice, which orientates what we like or do not like to hear, and equally it has to remain invisible. And I'll give away the little thing here, which we'll explore also at the end. That voice has to remain invisible, and music is a way to mask it and render it invisible. That's what I'm working on at the moment. And basically, whether it's about the sentences of counter sentences, Sätzen gegen Sätzen, whether it's about the sonata form, whether it's about the motif form, whether it's about a 1-5-1, whether it's about modulation, we are definitely in a process of differential signifiers. We are therefore in a process of ciphering and deciphering, which is what Freud talks about in the interpretation of dreams. Ciphering, deciphering, movements of signifiers, but most especially the difference from one signifier to the next. And that's Lacan's definition, in fact, of a signifier. A signifier is what another signifier is not. Right. And another advantage, if we scroll down, we can do away with a damn organicism. So, for instance, when we look at a Schenkerian descent, and I apologize to the non-musicians among you, let's have a look at the picture. The last one, yeah. So instead of organicism, instead of one developing from three, that's step 3, step 2, step 1, 3, 2, 1, that's my tonic, na, 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 okay? We can look at it in terms of diachrony metaphor and synchrony metonymy. That's how you harmonize your 3-2-1, by the way, Nick. Because I've seen people harmonize 2 with 2, degree 2, with a chord based on degree 2. No, it's with 5. This is why we have a name 1, 5, 1. 1, 5, 1, terminé, finished. Tchaikovsky, think Tchaikovsky, for instance. Right. Now let's look at some other aspects of musicology. We should be on development 2. Right, we're going to look very first at someone called Florence Jenkins. And I've chosen that example because, for 2 reasons. One, there's a film coming out about her with Meryl Streep in the part. And it's also at the very heart of an important Lacanian notion in that the subject is discordant with itself. It is not a unity. Okay? Right, who was she? She was an American woman who had it in her head that she was a marvelous, fantastic operatic singer. And at some point, she inherited money, so she could afford to hire halls, including Carnegie Hall, to give concerts. Okay? And her concerts were very, very, very well attended, but not for the reasons you think. So we're going to have an example. First, we're going to hear an amateur singing the aria of the Queen of Night from Mozart's opera, The Magic Flute. Yep. And now let's hear Miss Jenkins singing this. Okay, are you ready? Okay. She was absolutely persuaded that she was a fantastic singer.
Well, she was, but she did, I think, one note.
She was persuaded she was a very good singer. She was persuaded she really believed she had a very high F, for instance. This is where we can... She sold out Carnegie Hall. People went there to have a good laugh, basically. And this is where we can see that, again, the subject is not a unity. The subject is discordant with itself, because something in her psychical makeup, in her own psychical, transformed the wrong pictures into the right pictures. As far as she was concerned, everything was fine. Yeah? And until she died in 1944, she was absolutely convinced she was a marvelous singer. Another example, actually, of bad singing. But this time, it's called the choir for people who can't sing. But this time, they create a relationship with the fact that they can't sing. They know they can't sing properly. But still, they get together and they have a good belting. Let's have a look at the video. So they create a relationship with that division. A symptom, an inability to hear themselves and correct themselves, they create a connection to the social bond, and that's an important aspect here. We'll explore that a little bit later.
You had the same for mentions.
Sorry?
You have the same result for mentions.
Emotion, it's a big one in musicology. Even someone like Charles Rosen I've heard him fond about emotion. Okay. Emotion, it's a release of psychical libido. Think in which other type of situations you experience emotion. And psychical libido means libido which has been domesticated. This is another important aspect, not raw libido. It's simply a flow of libido through the body. Right. The success of pop music. Why is pop music so successful? Well, as I said earlier on, it uses the 151. And because this 151 has been in our culture for so long, it requires a minimum expenditure of psychical energy to recognize it. And the psychical system of ours is very, very lazy. When your levels of libido are low, that's when you feel at your best. And when they are very high, that's when you feel disturbed. This is what Freud called the pleasure and reality principle. The pleasure principle, low levels of libido, just like a little baby, you're so happy. High levels of libido, you are in the reality principle. That's when you have to do a lot of psychical effort, and that's when you feel slightly or a lot uncomfortable. And we can call that a field of coherence. This 151 business is what organizes everything. Hollywood film music convention. Well, we've seen this minimum and maximum expenditure of psychical energy. So when a Hollywood film director wants to create suspense, he uses non-151 music, which will require more of a psychical effort to apprehend it, to recognize it. And you will feel disturbed, which is what the film director was after. And when everything is nice, like in a love scene, nice, sweetie, sugary 151 music, minimum levels of psychical energy for recognition, minimal levels of libido. The octave. The octave is a structure, it's nothing natural. I heard someone tell me, oh, multiplied by 2, well, it's natural. No. Again, it took about 400 years to formulate this idea of the octave, which has to contain a certain number of notes, as well as certain intervals. So it has to contain a fifth and it has to contain a fourth. And that, again, is a field of coherence. And again, it took about 400 years to be elaborated. Something similar to Florence Jenkins, which is Tchaikovsky. I'm sure you've heard the name. And the Baroness. Baroness von Meck. If you're a composer, the more time you have to devote to composition, the better. If you have a day job, like Tchaikovsky had, he was teaching at the Moscow Conservatory, then you don't have much free time. And one day, this rich widow, Baroness von Meck, heard the music of Tchaikovsky and thought it was absolutely wonderful. So for about 17 years, 13 years, she subsidized him. She gave him money to compose, so he could devote himself exclusively to composition. With one condition, that they should never ever meet. So for these 14 years, they entertained a very lively, to say the least, correspondence, 1,200 letters or so. And the content of those letters is, let's say, kitsch, to say the least. They swore to each other eternal friendly love, eternal this, eternal that. Basically, we would call it over the top. But there is a very good reason for that in terms of Lacanian psychoanalysis. Let's look at RSI 3 imaginary. They were stuck in this category, Lacanian category, called the imaginary. Again, the subject is discordant with itself. What you see is not what you get, what you see is not what is. And all of us were very good at that. And that's why this business, Tchaikovsky and Baroness von Meck, not ever meeting, they never had an occasion to step in a full relationship with the bodies present. In that when the bodies are present, well, in the back of my mind, if I don't behave, you could, well, smack me around. It creates limits. Tchaikovsky and Baroness von Meck, being stuck entirely in the imaginary, didn't have any limits whatsoever. That's how the Freudian Lacanian text allows us to look at certain events of the life of music and musicology. This is why minimalist music works. You've been recently to a minimalist music concert. You went to see an opera of Philip Glass. So minimalist music is supposed to be...
Very minimalist.
Okay. That's a different period of Glass, yeah?
Yeah.
But minimalist music, Philip Glass, Steve Reich, consists in repeating over and over again the same material with an absolute minimum of variations. It's a type of music which was elaborated in the 60s. And that's why it works. By repeating the same thing over and over again, well, you don't need to have high levels of libido in order to recognize it. The first 2 or 3, 4 enunciations of what is being repeated is enough. And it puts you to sleep. And that's what the effect of trance in music is about. There's a lot of musicologists who say that by playing rhythmic music over and over again, such as drums, for instance, where you fall into a trance which is supposed to open higher levels of perception. I'm saying no, it's not at that level. It's simply at the level of your levels of libido being low. Right? Next screen. Oh yes, in terms of, while you do the next screen, in terms of libido, there's an interesting, some interesting comments from someone who's a little bit of a star of psychoanalysis from the old days, from the days of Freud, and that's Max Graf. Max Graf was the father of Little Hans, which is one of the 5 case notes of Freud. It was a little boy, 5 years old, who developed a phobia of horses, and Freud treated him, not directly, but indirectly via his father. And his father is Max Graf, and he wrote extensively about music, actually. He was what was called in those days an impresario, i.e. a producer. And he says something very interesting in his book. Music which is still considered magic by the listeners is eroticism in sound form. So this is 1930s writing by eroticism. We should elaborate on the concept of libido. In effect, it's a sensation in the body. Development 3, improvisation. Improvisation is also a big thing in musicology. Up until the end of the 19th century, improvisation was part and parcel of the training of a musician. People like Chopin, Liszt, even Bach could improvise for hours on their keyboard, on their instruments. And about Bach, the son, that dutiful son of Bach, Carl Philipp Emanuel, tells us the written fugues, preludes Bach has left us are nothing compared to what he could improvise on the keyboard. Mozart was a very good improviser as well. You gave him a few notes and he could improvise around them. And then for some reason, beginning of the 20th century, improvisation was thrown upon. You did not get trained any longer as a musician in improvisation. And it fell into the lap of jazz musicians, the black American jazz musicians. Some of them were actually did their music training in Paris at the conservatoire with, what are they called, the two sisters?
Yes, I was just
Okay. There were two sisters who they taught Ravel and Debussy. Sorry, I can't remember the name. They trained some people like Charlie Parker and Miles Davis went also to Paris to the conservatoire. Yeah. Okay. So improvisation suddenly is thrown upon in the West, in the Western world. We don't do that.
except for the organ.
Except for?
The organ.
Okay. And is left wide open for American black musicians to get hold of, right? So we saw earlier, how is improvisation possible? I do a lot of improvisation at my piano myself. How is it possible? We saw earlier on that there is knowledge which is not known. All you have to do is to let it out. In other words, open up to your unconscious. You can also do theater improvisation. I did that for about 6 months, a couple of years ago. And it's the same principle. There is knowledge, it's there, it's ready, but it is not known. Yeah? Glenn Gould, Canadian pianist from the 70s, he completely changed the way to play bar. Until his days, bar was played legato in a romantic way. Gould started playing bar staccato. But actually, and this is part of Gould's character, this staccato playing was not his invention. That was part of his piano teaching from his piano teacher. And we have accounts from other pupils of that particular piano teacher, Guerrero. And that was a technique he used to teach piano to people. Okay? So anyway, he developed that, he transforms that into an aesthetic. And then if you hear some of his recordings, because at some point he gives up live audience playing, he starts freaking out in front of the audience. And he devotes himself to recording. And during his recordings, he hums along sometimes. And he says, well, I try to stop myself, but I can't. The recording engineers try different microphone placement techniques. No way. So if you listen carefully, you're hearing humming. And he says, I can't stop myself. And that's an effect of libido, because one characteristic of libido, even though it fuels our thinking and our movements, and that's the genius of Freud, to have done away with the mind and body division. Mind and body are exactly the same thing, invested by libido. Libido is transformed into signifiers. Yes, you use it to fuel your movement, your piano playing, your instrument playing. But not the whole of libido, the entirety of libido is used. There is always a remainder which falls back on you. This is not a default on our part, it's the structure. So when that remainder of libido, which is not symbolized, falls back onto Gould, it makes him hum. Plus, he had a very, very bizarre piano posture, which goes against anything you'll ever be taught about the piano. he'd be either cross legs, hampering blood traffic in his legs, and like that. This is against anything you'll be taught how to play the piano. You're supposed to be like that. Okay. Still, it worked for him, okay. Except that he died of what appears to be an overdose. He had issues with a big other, in Lacanian terms. He used to say, these audiences, they're just waiting for one thing and one thing only. It's for me to fail. He ended up locking himself up, calling people at night for hours on end, medicating himself for some illness which no doctor could diagnose, and he went to see dozens of different doctors. Let's say that the drive got hold of him eventually. He was not able to successfully negotiate with his drive. Music pedagogy, inhibition, performance anxiety. Has anyone ever performed on stage in any capacity? Okay. Well, you get a little bit anxious. And there is a very good reason for that. You're going to be on stage, and a lot of libido is going to be flowing through your body, and everybody is going to see that. You're giving yourself a jolly good time. Using the Freudian Lacanian approach, it would be possible to actually negotiate these performance anxieties as part of your teaching. Yeah. But it's not currently done. Another aspect of music pedagogy is musicians' communication. How do you communicate, whether as a composer, as a conductor, how do you communicate with your musicians, most especially when you're performing contemporary work, which can be very difficult? So let's have a look at the way Messiaen does it. Music pedagogy, yeah, this one. Well, he writes this sentence, which in French does not make sense, actually. It's rather surrealist. Well moderated, well slow, as in a harmonious powder. But musicians will tell you, describe to us what effect you want. We'll do the rest. In other words, unconscious to unconscious communication is taking place here. Just give them a nice metaphor, a nice metonymy, and they'll handle it very well, rather than very precise technical musical instructions. The castrato, how do we account for that? In fact, the castrato was not castrated. It was just a young lad who had the snip just before puberty, so that his voice, as an older lad, would remain that of a young boy. And that was something the Catholic Church was very fond of. A man's body broadcasting a boy's voice. That was a delicacy for the ears, let's say. Now, how can we situate that? Well, there is this marvelous tool created by Lacan called the 4 discourses. I call it the 4+1 discourses. And in this respect, we have the master discourse. Can we have a picture of a master discourse? Very quickly, someone, S1, does something to S2. So the Catholic Church gives the snip to young lads. And that produces something called A, which is this marvelous young boy voice in an adult male body. And that goes right in the pocket of the one who's done it initially, S1. That goes right in the pocket of the Catholic Church, celebrating the beauty of the arts under the Catholic Church. Yeah? Agent acts on S2, that produces something, which goes back into the pocket of S1. And here, S1 is divided from his unconscious. He doesn't want to know he's got an unconscious. Nobody wants to know, in fact, but we've got an unconscious. Yeah. Another aspect of that, no, we'll stay with the castrator, so that's how we can account for it. Yeah? And then we have something very, very interesting. Yeah, you can close that. Not yet. Wagner and the X factor. What's the difference between Wagner and the X factor? What have we got to do together? Well, in Wagner, there is an opera called The Meistersingers from Nuremberg. And it is about music competition, which is held every year. And as a prize, you get to marry the boss daughter. Okay? So on this occasion, there is this chap called Walther, who actually is in love, and is reciprocated by Eva, which is the boss daughter. They both are in love. Because he's from poor origins, the only way he can get to marry her is by winning the competition. And in order to win the competition, you have to write the lyrics, you have to write the song, the tune, and you have to perform it. So they both get together and live happily ever after. And in this instance, what happens? It is a competition, yes, but it brings you inside the social bond, the fact of competing with other. He ends up with a new family. The father of Eva ends up with a son-in-law. There is an alliance between two families that contributes to the social bond. Yes? Okay. Now let's look at the X factor. It's a competition also. You win apparently recording contracts plus the adulation of audiences. But it is not, you cannot inscribe it in the master discourse. The master discourse does create a link to the social bond. Let's have a look now at the capitalist discourse. Right. The difference with the previous graph is that this is entirely autistic. It turns within on itself. It has no relation with the social bond, and it carries on regardless of the consequences. This is why Lacan called it the capitalist discourse. And that's one he formulated after the others. This is why I call 4+1 discourses. That's what goes on in the X factor. The X factor needs a new winner every year, otherwise it does not work. The previous winner ends up washed up, except for 1D, One Direction, which managed to do something. And still, they actually imploded. They imploded at the time I was writing this presentation, and I wanted to give that as an example. Yeah. And that's the effect of a capitalist discourse. Another aspect of it is what we are dealing with, each of us, every day. The reduction of grants for education, for instance, to go to university, the price of university education, and so on, all that. So this is the big difference there. In Wagner, you have a relationship with a social bond, in that opera of Wagner. In the X factor, you are entirely unplugged from the social bond, and you are thrown away, washed up. Try to find out what happened to all those winners of the X Factor pop idol. What happened to them? Yeah. And let's look also at the logic of what goes on with a record company when you've got a record contract. We've got a text. Yeah, you can close that. No, you have to go to the folder. Yeah, there's a text there. In the folder texts. Yeah, put this on there. Thank you, and let's do this one. This is music sales revenue. You think you've sold 1 million records and you think you've got £1 million in your pocket? No way. You've got 13% of £1 million. The record company will do everything to inflate all the expenses, all the associated expenses in marketing your record. And that's a well-known phenomenon. You really, if you want to make money in being a musician, a pop star, set up your own record company. I think My friend Thomas knows quite a bit about that because he's involved with record companies. Bette Midler, 3 months of streaming on Pandora. 3 months of streaming, 4 million plays. She got $144 of revenue. Right? Okay. And the new thing now is the music industry is trying to use algorithms to predict if the songs you're sending to them are going to be hits or not. That's the capitalist discourse for you, irrespective of consequences. Nobody can predict which piece of music is going to be a number one or not. Nobody. And that's the golden egg, basically, the music industry is chasing, trying to chase. So what music companies usually do is they invest on a group of people, say 10 people, and they spend 1 million on each of them, with the hope that one group will actually hit gold, and then they can make all their money back. But again, as an artist signed to a record company, you'll get very, very, very little money in your pocket. So you have to go to endorsements, for instance. Yeah. Tour, because tours are there to promote the single or the album. Yeah. Plus all the associated marketing, your T-shirts, your perfume, your car, whatever. Yeah. Oh, it's a car driven by 1D. Yeah, we like this car. Yeah, that's endorsement for you. And they get paid for saying that, of course. But that's how you actually make your money. So that's a huge difference between the master's discourse and the capitalist discourse there. Okay, let's go to listening model. Right. We are usually trained in thinking that listening to music is about performers and audience. I'm proposing something else. Let's have a look at it. Voila. So, first of all, my model is three-partites. It's got 3 parts. The audience, which listens to the performer, and the performer is addressing the work. He's handling the work. Okay? And that already accounts for the normal audience performer. But, how about this? The performer listens to the audience addressing the work. Or the work listens to the audience addressing the performer who is being addressed. Or the work listens to the performer addressing the audience. So permutations here. Yeah? And in this instance where the work listens to, it sounds stupid, how can a piece of music listen to when we're talking about the unconscious of a composer? There. Yeah? So from the Freudian Lacanian texts, that's the kind of things we can come up with, which I find to be a little bit more subtle than the traditional audience and performer. And last, pianiste de crise, crisis pianist. There is this chap called David Martello. Can we have David Martello number 1, please? Yeah. Right. He's built this contraption. This looks like a half-grand piano, which is hooked up to a bicycle. And what he does, he and his piano, they cycle to a place where there's been some trauma. For instance, December last year at the Bataclan, the explosion at the Bataclan. So he went there. And what he does is he plays music. That's why I was saying that early on, music was invented to mask the voice, to mask anxiety. Let's have a picture number 2, him actually sitting and playing. Okay. Yeah, that's this one. Nobody pays him to do that. It's of his own accord. And it calms people down. It calms the anxiety of having been part of being in a place where there was a bomb exploding or people being massacred, killed, for no apparent reason, which is what actually causes the anxiety. And that's his way of taking away that anxiety. So by playing 1-5-1 music, he brings the levels of libido down, because anxiety is high levels of libido, basically.
Isn't he covering rather than taking away?
Taking away. He covers, he creates a covers which allows the taking away. He gives music signifiers.
He gives music
Signifiers.
which come into the foreground.
Yes.
And the anxiety or whatever it is goes into the background. But he doesn't take it away.
I have not witnessed direct performances to be able to say whether it's just covering or and taking away at the same time. But yes, in that instance, you're correct. He is covering the anxiety. But the anxiety in that instance will still have to be dealt with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's still there somewhere, but he is moving people on because he's giving them something else to focus, but it's still there.
Yes, in that case, they don't get stuck in this position of anxiety.
And that's very important when you've had a traumatic event, an event that's unexpected.
And unexplainable as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you also making the point that it's significant that he plays music that employs a
Yes.
like one
Yeah.
rather than some serious piece?
Yeah, indeed. I don't think it would work with a surrealist piece, actually. This is why also I'm a little bit dubious about music therapy.
Yeah.
Music therapy maybe is not exactly what you want to do if you want to reduce the levels of libido, if you're dealing with anxiety. Yeah. Alors, and that's right. So overall, we can say that composition, music composition, first of all, it's like a dream. Initial material, condensation and displacement to create your melodies, plus subjective revision. This is, in a nutshell, what Freud writes in The Interpretation of Dreams, how dreams are made. Initial material would be the residues of a day previously, what you were thinking about. Condensation and displacement, metaphor and metonymy, and subjective revision. So that when you actually retell a dream, it hasn't got much to do with the actual dream you had. Some of us present here are currently involved in a working group on Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams. And this is what we're finding out. So it's a transposition in a way. And therefore, dream, that's what Freud says, is another form of thinking. So when I'm composing and I'm manipulating my little signifiers, or this one here, no, I'll put it there, and so on, it's just like a dream as well. I'm doing the same. And I'm going to introduce you now to a Lacanian notion that's Lacan's own version of the drive and libido, which he called jouissance. Early on, it was translated in English as enjoyment, and in the later translations in English of Lacan, the French word is left as is. Jouissance is an enormous amount of psychical energy, libido. It's so enormous that it becomes painful. It's like tickling. Tickling is pleasant. But there is a point where it tips over and it becomes painful. That's jouissance. Okay? And this is what Freud says. Dreams can carry on the intellectual work of daytime and bring it to conclusions which had not been reached during the day without us having to do anything whatsoever. Which means that psychical of ours is always on. It's never off, regardless of whatever. You cannot decide to think or not to think. You cannot decide to dream or not to dream. And that's what Lacan also calls jouissance. However, there is a little appreciation towards this state of things. We are not in charge, okay? But still, we can derive a pleasure from not being in charge and have the psychical of us functioning, producing all those theses, PhDs, and music and whatever. And that's what Freud called Lustgewinn, and which Lacan called surplus-jouissance. Lustgewinn means a gain of pleasure. Lacan called that surplus-jouissance, as derived from Marx. We're not in charge, but still, we enjoy whatever it is we manage to do with that psychical of ours. Right. Dream is another form of thinking, then therefore music composing is another form of thinking as well. This is why we could have the work in that listening model. Previously, we could have a work addressing the performer or addressing the audience, because it's my thinking, my unconscious thinking, which is present in the work. And another thing from Freud, they can resolve doubts and problems and be the source, dreams, can be the source of new inspirations for poets and musical composers. And in fact, one day I woke up and I heard a little theme in my head from the dream. I immediately noted it down and I ended up with a whole piece. Right. So, trust your unconscious. That's one thing. Development 3, please. No, sorry. Yeah. This thing about dreams from Freud is basically the equivalent of the popular wisdom, sleep on it. And in French we say, night brings wisdom. Okay. So we're going now towards the end. Recapitulation. I'm going to offend some of you because I'm going to use a word, an expression, which some of you may find dodgy. Right? The provisor read this word I'm going to use, feminine. Feminine actually is symbolic, as in symbology. The symbolic is always first, and then we apply it to life, such as the biological. But when I say here feminine, it's nothing to do with the biological XX. Okay? And a little hint about what this is about. If you were around in the 90s, you may remember that during the 1990 World Cup, suddenly on stage there were 3 tenors singing together. But there has never, ever been 3 sopranos together. So it takes 3 tenors are always males, to start coming up, being able to equalize with 1 soprano. So let's listen to those 3 tenors. They're singing Nessun from Toronto.
It's about interpretation, Richard. That's the point I think he's making.
But 3 of those, 1 soprano, yeah. Okay. And this is pointing at something which the psychoanalytic field revealed, is that there is no correspondence or adequacy between male and female. It's not cultural. Male has a particular structure, female has a particular structure. And there is nothing in those structures which is bound to bring them together. In a way, heterosexuality is not natural. It's a construction. And it has to be held into place. Yeah.
Can we say male and female here, or should we refer to masculine and feminine?
I'm using male and female, actually. It's not at the cultural level of masculine and feminine because we have different types of masculinities, different types of femininities. Among the Pearl people, for instance, a good husband is someone who's got perfect white teeth and who is able to make the best face, grimace, to pull faces. That's how Pearl women choose their husbands. Yeah. Here in the West, what is masculinity about? It's about big muscles and being tough and butch and everything. Okay, so this is why I'm referring to male and female. It's at that very level of male and female. Yeah. So I'm staying there. And we've seen that libido jouissance is always too much. And indeed, Freud says that aggressivity is the primary characteristic of a drive. So what do we do with that excess? Well, it can go into a symptom. And a symptom is a compromise. It's always painful in quantity or in its enigmatic character. A symptom can be you've got verruca growing at the bottom of your finger, or you catch a cold when nobody else catches that cold, or you're always losing your keys, you're always late for your appointments, or you're always arguing with your friends at work. That's a symptom. Okay. And there can be such a thing as collective symptom. This is a remark from Marie-Hélène Brousse. Collective symptom dissolves the social bond, and it creates a collective thirst for auto-destruction and sacrifices, and this is what we are experiencing right now at the moment with the ISIS business.
So would this be in opposition to like hysterical identification, collective symptom?
I think the collective symptom would be close to hysterical identification, yes.
Yeah, but it's collective. That's the difference. It's collective. And it's been recognised. It's what I can only think of Hitler, but it's what Hitler used. And this form of, to go back to music, once upon a time I went to a pop concert and I've forgotten the name of the group, but before they came on stage, they had a clock ticking down the minutes in seconds, and the last minute the whole audience erupted and counted down, and that's a sort of collective form of energy. It's not going anywhere, but it's there.
Then we can have, fortunately, because it's not just the symptom, even though you can't control where that excess jouissance is going to go, we have also sublimation. And sublimation is a roundabout way for the drive to reach its goal, which is to discharge, but without compromise. And this is a position in which an artist is. What's more, this sublimation can be enjoyed by an audience vicariously because someone else was able to do it. Well, somehow you also lift the repression because you see that someone else can do it, so maybe I can do it as well. And that allows the discharge of libido, which is again experienced as pleasure and satisfaction, low levels of libido. So the sublimation is very important here. And then we have Lacan's version of sublimation, which he called the symptôme, which is how to use your symptom, but to connect and reinforce the social bond. He called that in French escabeau, which means a step ladder. It's basically appreciating yourself and loving yourself. So as examples, Lacan's main example used to be James Joyce, of course. I'll use Proust. Proust had asthma. What does he do? Because he's got money, his family has got money, he locks himself up in his bedroom, which is paneled with cork to avoid noises, and he drinks hot milk, and he writes time remembered. That's how he uses his symptom from being basically immobilized at night and write a chronicle about French life. Now, our musicians, Bach and the Leipzig period. Bach got a very, very, very bad deal in Leipzig, which is the second part of his life, the end of his life. He wasn't very well paid, he wasn't very well considered, but he thought that he could serve his faith and celebrate his God much, much better by going to Leipzig. Actually, let's click on the Leipzig period. It's a PDF. It's already up. Yeah. It's PDF. Yeah. He was paid less. He had more work to do. Every Sunday he had to compose a cantata. He had to do the rehearsals of a cantata. He had to write the music because there was no computers in those days. He had to assemble the choirs. He had to teach as well, and he had to look after his family, 12 children. But nevertheless, because he considered St. Thomas Church in Leipzig a much better environment, he sacrificed what he had already to have less. So that's what he did with his sanctum. We know that Bach was a very grumpy chap. He would get his sword out on the slimmiest of provocation. Yeah. But nevertheless, he managed to perform. Bach single-handedly created this 151 and Western music. Nowadays, when you learn harmony and counterpoint, you go to Bach scores. Bach is the master. Right? Not that he tried to create that reputation or create that place for him. Another example is Beethoven. Beethoven became the composer as superhero. The composer, the artist, capable of sensing what was going on in the human soul at large and put it in musical form. That's how Beethoven also changed music. The name Schoenberg, which I've evocated earlier on, has been branded about also as an example of stepladder, somebody who was able to do something with his symptom, but I'm not so sure. Schoenberg he had a brain like a computer. He could recognize patterns just like that. And at the same time, he was very, very superstitious. He always thought that he would die on the 13th of a month. In his mid-50s, he died on the 13th of a month. Did he manage to create his stepladder? I don't think so. But that's open to interpretation. Olivier Messiaen, through his faith, intense faith with his wife, he celebrates God's work on earth, which is what any good Roman Catholic is supposed to do. What does he do? He goes around the countryside and he listens to birds and he writes down what the birds are singing and he transforms that into musical pieces. That's one of the ways of how to do with your symptom and connect to the social bond. Now, we saw the effect of jouissance, too much libido on individuals. Now, what effect does it have on the police, on the social bond? So we're going to start from culture. And this is why I had this word feminine at the beginning, because we're going to go and look at a Lacanian concept called to be in a feminine position. Again, this has nothing to do with being female. Okay? So bear that in mind. So on the cultural front, we have in Verdi, Rigoletto, La Donna è mobile, something my collaborator Julia knows very well because I keep reminding her, oh, La Donna è mobile, which means women are flighty. Okay? Then we've got Socrates, that's in the Symposium, where he says, well, everything I know, I learned it from a woman, Diotima. But we have no inkling as to where Diotima got her own knowledge. And then we have in ancient Greek mythology the muse, which comes from the Greek word musike. And both the muse and the sphinx are female. So there's a little indication there of what's going on. Okay. Freud. Women have less strong moral sense than men. That actually is a compliment.
They're less stuck than men.
For us lads, it's this or that. There's no in between. For females, okay. Freud, at some point, is in a conversation with Princess Bonaparte. What does a woman want? Because he doesn't understand what's going on with his female patients. Is that Freud's work of castration, or is it everyone's? Or is there something about females which no one, including themselves, are able to apprehend? The sexual life of adult women is a dark continent for psychology. That's Freud again. Again, hasn't got a clue. We have a concept of devouring mother, which we can elaborate as being an all-encompassing jouissance or libido. And then thinking in pictures and add in sounds is therefore a very incomplete form of becoming conscious. And in some way, and this is the first inkling of what's going on there with sublimation, it stands nearer to unconscious processes than just thinking in words. And then for Lacan, the equivalent. Lacan says women are closer to the unconscious. It's not cultural, it's a structure. Okay. Lacan, again, feminine jouissance cannot be represented because part of her jouissance is not orientated towards her partner. There is something which she keeps for herself. Okay. Lacan also says there is a hole in the symbolic. Later on, he will say there is a hole in the real. Seminar 1, the psychosis, he comes out with crocodile mother. But this is not an actual mother who treats her child as if she was a crocodile. This is in the head of a child, whereby the woman, the mother, rather, is perceived as crocodile mother. Okay. So all that gives us this expression from Lacan, to be in a feminine position, which is where I locate the artist. And again, it's nothing to do with male, female, but to be in a feminine position. These are elaborations, closer to substance than to the subject. So you're closer to the unconscious. Closer to the symbolic as being incomplete. The symbolic is always incomplete, otherwise we could not fabricate, compose more pieces of music, write more PhDs, there must be room. So the symbolic is incomplete and we have to accept that. To be in a feminine position is to have the ability to dissolve, change all forms, and create new ones. And that's how we can use that excess of jouissance.
Also gives it a political dimension.
Closer to avoid without features. Closer to primary processes, which is what Freud was saying. If you play an instrument, think of what happens when you're practicing or playing for yourself. Time suddenly does not exist anymore. Time flies by. Have you experienced that? And that can, in terms of a Freudian Lacanian text, the only explanation is that you are closer to the unconscious, because remember, the unconscious is outside of time. And this is what I call being in a feminine position. It's contingent. You can't decide to be in that feminine position or not to be. And it's a different relationship to knowledge. And we have a wonderful piece of fiction written by Steinbeck. Can I have Steinbeck, please? It's in the Grapes of Wrath, and it's towards the end, and it's the mother who says this. Man, he lives in jerks. Baby is born and a man dies, and that's a jerk. That means sudden movements. So man is, in that respect, is binary. It's either on or off. There's nothing in between. And then what she says is, woman, it's all one flow like a stream. Little eddies, little waterfalls. But the river, it goes right on. This is written in 1939. This is absolutely extraordinary. And as far as I'm aware, Steinbeck never came across Freud or not even Lacan. Lacan started in about 1936. And this is what I call being in a feminine position, not only just being closer, not in, but closer to the unconscious, and being able to handle what comes out of the unconscious, the creative process, basically. It does not just apply to artists, but to whatever hobby you may have, whatever hobbies. When you devote time to your hobbies, there's no more time. Whether it's your collection of stamps or gardening. You like gardening, don't you?
I do gardening.
You do gardening. Okay, let's go back to there. Yeah. So, this is my now is the next one. Political position. Should be the last one. Recapitulation 2. Yeah. Right. Political. Because, to start with, psychoanalysis is political. There is the politic of a psychoanalyst himself. And there is the politics of a school. The school behaves in a political way. And those politics have an effect on the police because they bring questioning, various questioning. At the moment, the questioning is about the knowledge expert of science, as in the DSM. The DSM is the repertory of psychiatric illnesses. Up until the early 90s, homosexuality was defined as an illness in the DSM. And it is the psychoanalytical discourse which has brought questioning and brought pressure and brought the idea of looking at those definitions again. And at the moment, in job centers in this country, counseling for people who are unemployed. Islington Council is doing that. And they've got counseling in the GPs as well if you are unemployed. Because if you're unemployed, it's your own fault. Something is wrong up there. We're going to correct it. Okay?
You lack economic happiness, according to Lord
Yeah.
Layard.
The pursuit of happiness means the pursuit of money. Okay? So this is why psychoanalysis is political. For Freud, it was definitely political very early on, from 1908. He saw that there was a basic dissatisfaction. No matter how much money you have in your pocket, you'd still be dissatisfied because there is something in the structure which cannot bring full satisfaction. So here is my political position, and again it came as a surprise when I was working on this that this came out. Allow access to sublimation, or else it's going to explode in your face. I address that to governments of any ilks whatsoever. No sublimation, what are you going to do with jouissance, with libido? It's going to destroy the social bond, it's going to dissolve the social bond, it's going to dissolve the individual as well. And the individual will drown in lots of symptoms. And this is what we are already seeing. Something we are discussing on the news group, The Letter. We've got lots of examples of that happening. Okay? And an example for this country was, I understand that under Cromwell, Parliament decided to ban Christmas because it was too Catholic. And what happened? Riots in 1647. Right? This magazine, taken down from Facebook. Let's have a look at what was there. What it was about, nothing really offensive, but Facebook. And that's what this is doing, is putting into humor some aspects of life, that's sublimation for you. You may not agree with that form of sublimation, but it is sublimation. Facebook says, no way. It's like the way they take down images of breastfeeding because their algorithmic software, looking at the picture, sees a breast, it's unable to take into account that it's actually a child being fed at the breast, but they see a naked breast. It's nudity censored. Right. Next one. Because sublimation allows the shaping of a subject jouissance. It's a way for you to socialize, symbolize your excess jouissance. Like me here right now standing in front of you. I really enjoy, as you know, some of you know, I'm a stage monkey and I really enjoy being on stage. And that's a form of sublimation for me. So allow access to sublimation. And it allows for the fabrication of an object. It's not an object which you can find ready-made in the world. You have to fabricate it yourself in order to mask the incompletude of a symbolic. And as Freud says, it's also a compensation for renunciation. Wouldn't we love to have money flowing constantly in our pockets while we're in bed having to do nothing? But no, we have to get up and prepare our PhDs and write this, write that, and go to work. So we have to renounce, for a time, being in the pleasure principle, and the objects created by sublimation, and in particular by art, are a reward for that. So by accepting that, you can then, once you are in this, to be in a feminine position, once you are in that particular position, you have an enjoyment of ciphering and deciphering, either directly or via watching somebody else vicariously. One example was this pianiste de crise, this chap with his piano on his bike. Yeah? The choir who can't sing. Yeah? Geoff Baker, which is the new director of the IMR, the institute here, who very graciously allows us to do what we are doing. He's involved in a project called El Sistema. It's in Venezuela. And they use music, classical music. They've got an orchestral classical music with local participants, and it allows them to become socially included. It's the same in Scotland. They're doing that in Scotland as well. They've been doing it since 2012. It's in Stirling. So they get the local kids from the local estates to learn how to play an instrument, an orchestra instrument, and they get together an orchestra, and they perform. And there is your bit of social inclusion, being included in the social bond. And that allows you to create your step ladder on which you're going to climb to show how marvelous you are. And that's very important because it's a way to wake up from the nightmare of your history. That's what Lacan says about Joyce. Joyce had a symptom which he turned into a symptom. He pulverized the English language, creating new words, new expressions. Quark, for instance, which has now become the name of a particle, but that's a word created by Joyce. At the same time, it brings him back into the social bond. Joyce wanted desperately to be published. He famously said, in 100 years, academics will still be talking about me. So he had his sublimation in place. And as a conclusion, as per Lacan, do not compromise on your desire. You're going to ask, well, what if my desire is to kill people? That's not a desire. Desire is in the psychoanalytical sense. Socialized libido, socialized jouissance, which can connect rather than destroy a social bond. And Éric Laurent, who says alone altogether, and by that he means we are alone within this all-togetherness. We are alone with our little gadgets. You know, when you're on your phone, texting and whatever. I'm reversing that to say, let's be all together, But let's preserve that aloneness, which I equate with my own singular jouissance and my own singular sublimation, because we all have a different jouissance, we all have different symptoms. And that's what I conclude on. And as an example, one of my objects, this is not just, can you scroll a bit? Thank you. This is not just a piano, it's not just any piano, it's my piano. Right? With my sublimation, that's my jouissance. And barring, impeding access to that, I'm saying it's very dangerous. So voilà, merci. My email, if you wish to correspond at a future date. Et voilà, merci beaucoup.